You're listening to The Elephant Test. We're dedicated to the B2B marketing community and here to explore the practices, thoughts, and ideas of effective B2B marketing executives.
Thank you for joining us on The Elephant Test. I'm your host, Sky Cassidy, and joining us today to talk about B2B data and data sources, uses, and hygiene is Ruth Stevens. Ruth consults on customer acquisition and retention, teaches marketing at business schools in the U.S. and abroad, and is a guest blogger at Biznology and Target Marketing Magazine and a contributing writer at Adage. We're thrilled to have you on today. We ready to get started?
Yes, thank you.
Excellent. So B2B data, obviously, it's something that's close to my heart. My company is a B2B data company itself. Really excited to talk to you about this. If you guys don't know who Ruth Stevens is, as a B2B marketer, you are not doing your job. Make sure you're following her. But before we really get into the kind of data stuff, and that's where your expertise is, I'd kind of like to dig into you a little bit as a person, kind of where you came from, how you got into B2B marketing.
Wow, thanks. Well, I actually entered the direct marketing world in my first real business opportunity. I was at Time Warner's book division at Book of the Month Club in my first job out of business school. And there I learned the basics of direct and database marketing, and I just loved it from the first day and have been a data-driven marketer ever since. But after about 7 years there, I had an opportunity to move to Ziff-Davis, a computer industry publisher, which around then was at the peak of its powers, both financially and in terms of influence. They published the leading computer industry magazines, just chock full of advertising, and were making a ton of money. They also had amazing, very popular and profitable events in the age of Comdex. So that's where I learned about B2B, and the mission there, of course, was sales lead generation for a sales force that was selling ads, and in my case, selling computer industry information on CD-ROMs sold by subscription. So it's a lot of fun, and I've stayed in B2B ever since.
Yeah, Ziff-Davis, a big data company. Is that where you kind of fell in love with data, I guess I'd say?
Well, not really. I actually got entranced by data at Book of the Month Club, where we made all of our marketing decisions based on projected ROI of customer acquisition for the special interest book clubs, which is where I started. And we used spreadsheets and SAS documents as a way to estimate how much we could afford to spend on acquiring a new member in a book club based on lookalike data of similar prospects and how they had behaved on the so-called back end, and whether we were going to make a positive contribution in that acquisition to the company. And if it looked like we couldn't possibly acquire the customer at the right price, then it was my job to go back to the media vendor and try to negotiate a lower media cost so that the ROI would come out where we needed it to be. So those marketing decisions were all driven by information about customer behavior and the positive and negative behaviors, meaning the revenue that they generated for us, and also the expenses, like how much it cost us to ship out the books, and what were their return rates and bad debt rates and so forth.
Great. So you've made a little bit of a turducken of data there for me, which I want to speak to. We get in trouble with data all the time over here because just using the word data can be very loaded. A lot of people have a lot of definitions of what data means to them, and you addressed both of them there. So I kind of want to call that out and separate them for the listeners. So when you speak of data and you talk of marketing numbers and stuff, you're talking about kind of the analytics and looking at the traffic and who's interacting with you and number of leads and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then there's the data that's the actual contact info, and you had both of those that you were discussing there. But I guess the problem I see a lot of times when talking about data is it means so many different things. Some people
Right.
it's just a character on Star Trek, and some people it's contact info, and it can mean so many different things. So I guess we're going to get pretty messy as we talk here because you're involved so much in data. I'm going to try to always kind of point out which data we're talking about, so the listeners don't get too confused.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that we agreed on a topic today that is data defined as a customer record, and that's where I hope we'll spend most of our time. But the data about a customer record is really, I think, today the most important element in a B2B data-driven strategy. Most of us are not using the kinds of customer behavior data for acquisition purposes on the B2B side that is done in direct marketing and e-commerce and other consumer, ROI-driven business decision making. So glad you pointed that out, and let's dive into the customer record side, because in the B2B world there's some really interesting conundrums there and exciting new developments that we can talk about.
Right. And then they start to merge together. I mean, you have a record where you have the person's email address, phone number, name, title, all that kind of stuff. But then within that same record, many companies will start to collect intent data, intent information. And then that you could really make an argument on both sides for what data bucket that fits in. Is that contact information, or is that information like, you're looking at how many times they clicked on certain parts of your website and everything. It starts to cross over almost and get muddy in between which, is this something in an individual field in your CRM, or is this something that goes into marketing analytics and it's just numbers type of a thing. But yeah, let's stick to the contact information data stuff as much as we possibly can. Try to keep it clear for people. Before we dig into that too much, we got a little bit on your background and where you came from. Can you tell us a little bit about your company, what you guys do there, kind of what your day-to-day is?
Sure, thanks. Yes, I'm a sole practitioner, so there are no we guys here. It's just me. But I have been happily self-employed for 17 years, and I consult on B2B marketing for clients large and small. I also do a lot of training and corporate education and public education, whether it's in business schools or on behalf of associations like I've taught for the Association of National Advertisers and the Direct Marketing Association and many others who will send me into a company to train employees on certain topics. So I really enjoy the self-employed life. My typical deliverable is I'm asked to come in and look at their lead generation program today, for example, and make recommendations for improvements. Or another deliverable that I'm often asked to focus on is companies that don't even have a marketing plan, which is remarkably frequent in the B2B world, where lots of things are going on, but nobody's ever sat down and thought about deep questions like, where is our low-hanging fruit audience, and what's our value proposition, and how can we motivate them to raise their hands and express interest, and how can we qualify that interest? So
yeah. I have a question for you on that. When you're going into companies, what's the biggest issue that you usually find coming in that kind of surprises you? Oh, I imagine there's some low-hanging fruit sometimes where you just say, wow, this is easy. We should start doing this.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, to bring it back to the data side of the conversation, Sky, if you ask any B2B marketer in the world, I guarantee 99.9% of them, if you ask them, so what's the state of your data? They will say, our data stinks. And they won't use that word. They'll use another word. And so I know you have a family radio going on here, Sky, sorry. But people really have trouble acquiring and maintaining good information about customers and prospects. And when it comes to prospects, that's understandable. It's difficult to get good quality prospect data. But when it comes to current customers, it's shocking how many errors there are in the customer record. You would think that marketers would understand the importance of having the correct title, the direct phone number, a legitimate and correct email address, and then other rich enhancements to the customer record, like, if they're an existing customer, how much they bought, or what was the margin on that revenue. What else do we know about them? What are their interests? What's their wives and children's names? Things, the kinds of information points that can help a marketer be more effective in current customer marketing, not to mention prospecting. So data is really one area that I often find to be a source of weakness in a typical B2B marketing department.
And I guess if you identify that as the most important part and the thing that's most often an issue, I guess that's why you specialize in that particular area. I've always found it shocking when my company does a lot of cleaning and appending for companies, and typically it's not with a prospect list, it's with their client lists. And it surprises me. Sometimes the list is very clean and we say, oh, wow, this is very complete information, it's up to date. But I'd say not only marketing is touching these, but the salespeople are usually touching these records as well. That's, the clients. And we say, how is this information here this way? How is this information not in here? And I think on the sales side, it comes back to accountability. Like, how can you have a salesperson that doesn't have an accurate email for a contact they've been selling to for years, or doesn't have their title, or just doesn't, all the information that's missing? Sometimes it can be really shocking, or almost worse than missing is just inaccurate. It's there, and somebody is seeing it regularly, and it's just wrong. But I guess what I've found in the data industry is it's not difficult to get information anymore. When I started out in this business in the early 2000s, getting people's contact information with email addresses in the B2B space was difficult. We had a really, really nice niche in that area. But then over time, recently, we've identified that people have a bigger issue with data's become a commodity. Now they have so much of it, and it's maintaining it that's the issue. And for us, for the last decade plus, maintaining it's been the issue as a data company. So we've learned how to do that well, but most companies just aren't tooled to maintain the volume of data that they've been able to collect now, because it's been such a commodity. You have companies that have hundreds of thousands of records, and they don't have a database administrator in-house. They can barely process it in a spreadsheet, that kind of stuff. It's so much data, and they can't keep up with how fast it goes bad. And so you end up having a lot of very dirty
that's
data.
So true. And I think we need to be tolerant and sympathetic, because there's so many challenges in data cleanliness. Thinking about the data that, or the rates of decay that I'm familiar with, where we say a data element in a B2B customer record is likely to change at the rate of 3 to 5% per month. And, keeping up with people's changing companies, changing titles, changing mail stops, changing phone numbers is really a legitimate business issue. So the fact that, the data has errors is understandable. But the other thing, I loved your point about they don't even have a data administrator. That's where I think people like you and I can try to make a persuasive case that this is a serious business issue and a squandered opportunity. If you are letting your data sit and decay without maintaining it, continuously updating it and verifying it, you risk offending your customers. And leaving business opportunity on the table. So I often say, look, you can't just say, as a marketer, you can't just say, oh, data is so-and-so's job, that guy over in the corner who handles our data for us. I think we marketers need to take ownership, responsibility, and a personal interest in correct and complete records. I would also add, just to your point about there's so much data flowing through companies. We also need, as strategic marketers, to think carefully about what data elements we want to maintain in a customer record, because as you pointed out, there's a ton of opportunity to cram a lot of fields into your record. And then once they're there, you want to, invest in maintaining and updating them. And there may not be that business value there. So you have to develop what I call a data strategy for the firm. You need to make the hard decisions about what elements in a customer record you want to maintain and which ones you want to just toss out.
Right. One thing, I made a joke recently around the office here that I am against women taking their husband's names.
Okay.
And they looked at me strange and, oh, okay, that's really progressive of you. I said, no. It really makes the data difficult to maintain.
What a very practical way to make social decisions. I like that.
Yeah, we found the half-life of data is about 2 years. And we find people can kind of wrap their head around that when they say, oh, you haven't looked at your data in 2 years. Half of it has gone bad then. That's just contacts that aren't there anymore. When you talk about people changing titles and all the other kinds of things that change, direct numbers, extensions change, all that stuff, it can be a disaster. And people come to us for data, for new data, and they demand 90% plus accuracy on data. But then within their own databases, they might have 50% accuracy, something like that. And it's crazy, especially when you're looking at a customer file, that kind of stuff. It's not that many records. And it's really important that marketing, take the lead on keeping that data accurate and up to date. And I think, like you said, deciding what's really important really helps too, so that you're not trying to keep everything accurate, everything up to date. Just find the important stuff.
Yeah, I was also going to make the point about relating to what you said about the salespeople not key entering data properly or understanding the importance of it. And that's a subject that I think is really worthy of some examination, because I could also make the argument that as a business owner, for me to have my highly valuable salespeople doing administrative tasks is not good use of their time. I need my salespeople to be out selling in front of customers, not, tracking down email addresses. So, but at the same time, the work has to be done, or, the email address needs to be tracked down. So some companies have a function called marketing operations that is responsible for that, to try to take it off of the salespeople's plates. But it's a difficult decision for a business owner to figure out how to have it both ways. And you're blaming some societal problems on data. I am too. I think the marketing tech environment that we operate in today has forced us into some bad business practices. Our so-called CRM systems, which are really Salesforce automation systems. Let's not forget that Salesforce.com and all of its brethren were designed to be productivity tools for sales teams, not customer databases. And and all the attendant maintenance issues are being foisted on a salesperson who's neither trained nor incented nor even deserving of that job. So who do I blame? Mark Benioff or somebody for part of this plight. I mean, I grew up, let's name names. I grew up when a data-driven company would have a marketing database or a data warehouse that was fed by various sources. And for B2B companies to to call their so-called CRM system, formerly known as SFA system, their marketing database is really a mistake, I think.
So would you recommend keeping separate systems for the marketing data and the sales team's
I think
information?
a marketing department needs to have a database, that can be queried. SFA systems were not developed for marketing querying. They were, but here I'm getting a little bit out of my depth because I don't understand the technologies well enough.
In our company, the CRM that we use, we've been customizing heavily for a while. And one of the things that I've noticed is originally we wanted all the marketing data to be in there. So salespeople had access to it when you have many contacts at the same company, just so they had access to more information. So we had it all in one centralized point. And then what we've been doing the last probably 2 years is we probably created redundant fields for almost every status type you could have. And the redundancy is in that there's one status for the sales team and one status for the marketing team. So it's the same database, but marketing and sales have their own almost version of it. They have their own. Marketing will have a contact status. They'll have a company status. They'll have, all these different information. So marketing can pull based on what they want to pull, and sales can pull and they want without stepping on each other's toes. I guess we found a one-time marketing updated a bunch of contact statuses from a campaign and disqualified a bunch of contacts that salespeople were pursuing at the time and were talking to and working to close and had proposals out to, that kind of stuff. And we realized, these things really, we're in the same system now. We hadn't really considered separating the systems, but we did need to separate the kind of, so they weren't touching the same fields, they weren't touching the same statuses, because they would conflict with each other.
This is a great subject. You're inspiring me to go look into this a little bit more deeply.
Yeah, I mean, we found when you talk about things falling through the cracks, and you go and consult at businesses, and you're probably looking for, first off, what are the quickest, easiest things they're doing wrong that you can just do this, not this, and you'll have better results. You're losing a bunch of business here, you're losing money there. And that's, what we found was when sales and marketing were changing the same statuses, you would have them throwing information out. Sales would throw information out that marketing wanted to market and needed to market to still. And marketing would throw things out that sales was actively working on, because, they'd fail the marketing activity or they'd fail the sales activity. And having that information separate, I hadn't thought about. So we'll take a break and come back after the break. We'll come back and we'll talk about data more, get into the specifics of contact info, data sources, uses, hygiene, all that kind of good stuff.
Our episode today is brought to you by Engagio. If you're thinking about ABM and not sure how to start or which plays to run, Engagio just came out with a new playbook for marketers, featuring 16 plays that have been tested in the field to get results. Check them out at engagio.com/orchestration.
Hi, we're back from the break. You're here with Sky Cassidy of the Elephant Test and Ruth Stevens of e-marketing strategies. Sorry about that, Ruth. We'll edit that out in post. Okay. I say that all the time, but we never do. So we're talking about B2B data, data sources, uses, hygiene. Kind of want to get into covering those specific areas, see if we can kind of address them, go through any tips you have for people with data. I think you'd mentioned before the break, hopefully not during the break, but before the break, talking about how people shouldn't be afraid of data. I really want to jump into that. So let's go ahead and jump in. I've got contact info, data sources, uses, hygiene. Where do you want to start?
Sure. Well, let's start with how about if we start with data sources, because just building on the comment you made before the break about how there's data everywhere, it's commoditized. What I've found that's so interesting is some of the innovative new sources that are providing an opportunity to differentiate for marketers and also for data vendors. In a commoditized world, you end up, differentiating on price, and it's just a terrible, pointless. spiral downward. And
we call it a commodity, but it's really a semi-commodity. It behaves kind of like a commodity, but it's not. It's just very difficult for companies to distinguish when they have, X many of thousands of targeted records in a specific, specific company's target audience, and another company has. It's not a commodity. It's sold like a commodity, but then once people get it, they realize it's not. But then you already have it, kind of.
right.
So it's a weird version of a commodity. Do we want to name some names of companies? My company is a data company, but I tell people all the time there's probably maybe a dozen list companies in the U.S. that I'd recommend that they talk to and reach out to and know who they are.
Yeah, I'd love to see your list of recommended companies at some point. What I'm finding it completely exciting is some of the stuff that's going on with social media data, even in the B2B world, which has taken me by surprise, and also this whole direction of intent data that I think it's still shaking out or emerging as a category, but it's a very exciting prospect. Another area that I would point to is the widely underused data source known as the IP address of a web visitor, where companies can actually see what firm or the firm of the browser that visited your own homepage or your other company websites is publicly identifiable either by hand looking at Google Analytics or through some of these service offerings where you can hire a software company to track who's visiting and give you detailed information about the company that just stopped by your website that morning. This is a treasure trove, I think, of data available to B2B marketers that is not available to consumer marketers, which is one reason I find it so exciting.
Yeah, there's not many areas where B2B has more data than consumers or has something consumer marketing doesn't.
Yeah, exactly.
One thing that we recommend to people, we do here, we find very successful, is when we do email campaigns, we will, every link in the campaign, we will put the user's either their email address or some sort of code that references to them in the link itself. So the question mark / afterward type thing. So that not only can we tell what company was coming to the site, but what individual contact was coming to the site.
Yeah.
We found that to be really useful for our sales to marketing connection there. Salespeople love it when you don't just say XYZ company visited, but this person from the company visited. And that's something we've started digging into a lot more. I think there's really only a couple companies out there that provide these IP addresses right now. And we're starting to build a database of those because, we recognize how valuable that is, how much you can, as the different MarTech technologies really are starting to rely on that IP information a lot more, I think, than they used to.
And is that contact identified by a cookie, or how's that done technically?
No, just the link itself. So when you send, and this is only for email campaigns, you can't really do it. I mean, you can use cookies and all kinds of other stuff for other types of identification. But when you send out emails and somebody clicks on a link in that email, you can customize every link in the email to the individual contact.
Right.
And
Understood.
And that way you tell which person came through to the site just by a code to the end of the link.
Yeah, that's very cool. And then, of course, intent data is still, while it's still emerging, shows a lot of promise to any person who has experience in direct marketing. It just makes so much logical sense that if you have downloaded a case study on subject X, that you might be in market for subject X. And the tools are available and starting to break through. Sixth Sense has been experimenting with this for quite a while. Bombora claims to be the sort of leading deliverer of such information. And then I'm also really excited about LeadSpace and Lattice and EverString and these other predictive modeling companies who will take your own house file or your respondent file and build a predictive model to find lookalikes in the general population of B2B companies and contacts, and feed you back a pile of potential prospects, either at the company level or at the contact level. That's, database marketing 101 put to its best application in B2B. Really exciting.
Yeah, enabling what you were doing, a long time ago with the lookalike.
Exactly.
In a MarTech fashion.
Yeah, I think the fact that MarTech has really only been with us for about 10 years, and these very exciting and productive new opportunities have opened up so quickly, it says to me that the next 10 years it's going to explode, and we all need to keep an eye on this stuff.
Yeah, the MarTech is really exciting. We actually just recently launched an API to kind of plug our own company here, specifically for MarTech companies. One of the things we notice about them is the barrier to entry is really low. Anybody can go out and create a tool that adds some point of value within the MarTech industry. But the place the barrier to entry is really high is, and data may be cheap, it may be a commodity, but for MarTech companies where you need typically a massive amount of data to make the matches you need to make, you really need access to tens of millions and tens of millions of contacts. And so that's something with an API where we've been really looking to reach out and kind of foster a scholarship program for some of these MarTech companies that there's really cool things they could build, but they can't afford the $100,000 a year right off the bat to get access en masse to business data.
What a nifty idea. That's a real contribution you're making.
Oh, thanks. We're great people.
Another thing I wanted to mention that I'm sure you've heard about is I do a lot of work with one of your, colleagues, partners, competitors, Stirista, and they've developed what I think is a nifty new product called Stirista Link that marries the consumer record with the B2B contact record. So I focus on B2B marketing, so I'm thinking, if I can add information about my B2B customers' personal interests and buying behaviors, that can give me rich new insights to build communications, outreach strategies, to tell the sales team more about their prospects and current customers. That it adds a lot of value in our B2B world, where most of us have total audience sizes of 10,000 or maybe fewer prospects and current customers. So the more we can know about each of our customers is usually worth knowing or bringing into the customer record. So I think ideas like that can enhance the B2B strategy and campaign and relationship building.
Funny you mentioned that. I met Stirista at an event years ago, and then a couple years before that, I'd started looking at the prospect. I said, what's next? Having emails and business data, early 2000s was a big deal. And then I said, what's the next thing that people are going to want and need now that this is a commodity? What's the next thing value we can add? And I thought, if we can overlay business and consumer data, and we looked at it and we said, well, you know what, there's just not a high enough match rate across the two. You don't have a point of information where you can connect them together.
Yeah.
You have their consumer email probably on the consumer side, and then you have you don't have a one piece of information that crosses over. You actually need really massive databases on both sides to have enough overlay for it to have value. Now that was years and years ago, though. Then I spoke with Stirista at an event just maybe 2 years ago, something like that. And this came up somehow. I brought it up to them, and they said, "Oh, I believe at the time they said, oh yeah, we're about to launch something like that."
Yeah.
And I think now one of the great things is there's so much social media and so much online. It isn't, you're not going to a consumer data company and saying, let's overlay our files and see where we can connect contacts. There's so much information you can collect from online now.
Yeah.
Given the recent news with Russia and Facebook and all that kind of stuff, There's just on social media like Facebook, you can get a lot of information on people. I think that's what companies are starting to do. Companies like Starista, I don't know exactly how they do that, but I imagine a lot of it is kind of what can you collect. It's this digital exhaust that you find online people use for intent data in general.
Mm-hmm.
It's doing that for consumer data and saying, oh, this is, these are most likely the same people, and here's a lot more information on their favorite sports teams and all this other stuff that would normally be considered consumer fields. I'm not sure, and what I haven't seen yet, if they are doing this, more power to them, that's great, is the actual overlaying of the consumer data, because that data typically involves things like, personal purchasing habits, credit ratings, whether they own a home or not, their family, all kinds of stuff like that. And that would be very interesting. It's at some point you have so much information as a marketer, you get, what we call the creep factor.
Yeah.
Can kind of play if you're not careful with how you use it. And marketers are not the most sensitive people, so be careful.
Gee,
but,
I hope we are. I aspire to be.
Well, usually we get information, we want to use it. Somebody's dog's name and you use it and you don't realize how that's going to look to them. I use the analogy of a singles bar a lot. If you walk up to somebody and you have a great conversation with them, it's one thing. But if you walk up to somebody at a singles bar, you start talking and you know everything about them already, that can freak them out a little bit. So I guess I'd say hold back a little bit. Don't let them know that you've been stalking them and know everything about them. It can creep people out a little bit. Yeah. But no, the more information you have, the better. Yeah, the crossover, the consumer and business data is a pretty exciting thing. And I'm really glad that they're doing it. Like I said, I like to name names of other data companies, and you'd mentioned I've got a couple I can rattle off here for the listeners, Ruth, of companies that I refer people to all the time. That I say one of the things about the data industry is most companies you talk to, hopefully, probably we work this way. We tell people we're not monogamous when it comes to data. Like you should have multiple sources. We always recommend that people have a good 3 sources, depending on what your target audience is. You want to try to have 3 sources. The great thing about a commodity is there's no reason to limit yourself to one company as a source. And data is close enough to a commodity that it doesn't cost anything to reach out to a data company and say, let me see a sample. Let me know what you have in this area. Then all you have to have is the guts to tell them no.
But let me also, Sky, add that I don't know if this is happening to you, but I am getting emails from unknown data companies offering me lists of business executives all the time. And in fact, I was keeping a file folder, a virtual file folder of these, what I call suspicious data vendors. This must drive you crazy as a supplier in the field, but I think there's a lot of bad behavior out there and unscrupulous vendors. So just to add a cautionary story, I would say that you're getting a referral like you're offering to a reliable, trustworthy, and professional data vendor, I think is a very important first step.
Yeah, there's a couple rules I like to tell people. And the number one rule is if they're not US based, don't buy data from them.
Good.
If you can't call there and get a live person on the line, don't buy data from them. And that's just like a nice starting point. And then really, if they're not one of the recognizable companies out there, and that's one of the things that's happened is now people buy from brands because people who know data know, our industry's our reputation has been ruined by so many of these overseas companies. They approach us sometimes wanting to sell us data, and they'll tell us, "Oh, we have this database of this many records we want to sell you." And sometimes they'll tell us where they got it from, and we don't work with overseas companies because we know if they're touching our data, somebody in the company at least is going to take that asset and try to sell it out on the market, as a data company. It's just because it's just information, it's too easy for them to turn it around and start selling it. Now they can't maintain it, so they're always selling bad data, outdated data that they've stolen from somebody that they did a project for, whatever it is. But it's not to say everybody. I'm sure there's some good players, but as a general rule of thumb, we just tell people, stick to the players in the U.S. that people know of. It's a shady industry, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So a couple of the companies that I would recommend, companies, some of them have been around a long time, some have not. You mentioned Starista. They're a good company to check in on. And any of these companies should be able to give you a sample, give you a quote, let you know how many records they have in your specific target audience, that kind of stuff. It's not going to cost you anything. So it's really easy, and it should, if you reach out to them, if you send them an email the info out and say, here's what I'm interested in, let me know what you have, and they don't get back to you, then they're not a good source for you. So that's a good initial test. That's a good way right off the bat of saying, do you want to talk to this data company? Send them a request, see if they send you anything worthwhile. If they send you a sample, now you can compare that. So Starista is good. Info USA is a company that you can go to. Zoom Info, I believe Info USA, if you're looking for direct dial numbers, some companies have different strengths. Info USA is really good on the direct dial number area. Then there's Hoover's, of course. They've been around forever. They have really deep information on a lot of companies. And then you have Discover.org, recently purchased Rain King. Those were the two data companies we told our salespeople, don't worry about anybody except for these guys.
Okay.
Companies using another data provider, great. But these guys are going to be difficult. They're very expensive. Now they've merged into one company, but they're very expensive for a reason. If what you're looking for is within what they collect, then they're a great source. And they focus on the largest companies. I think the top maybe 60,000 companies, something like that, is their focus, and they do a great job there. They have org charts. They have very accurate information. They're very up to date, and they're just a high quality data company. So they're great for that, but very expensive price tag. Of course, I don't have to mention our company name we've mentioned plenty of times, but MountainTop Data. Check us out. If a request is sent to us and we don't get back with a sample, then somebody's in trouble. Any companies' names you could add in for people to have a look at?
Yeah, that's a good list. I might add, in the case of looking for response data, I would add the Merit Direct company. It's sort of a different animal, but worth talking to for response data.
Yeah, then there's a handful of people out of Silicon Valley, new kind of up and coming companies they're kind of on the fringes of data. They have their own angles a little bit. One of the downsides to them is I don't think most of those companies have. I've seen a lot of their data, and they don't have very good data foundation, which is really kind of key. But they've got some great MarTech type things where they're not going to get you, 50,000 records within your target audience with complete information, but they can get you something useful for your marketing. But I would say as a foundation, kind of the companies I named off are the ones that I would start looking at for people. They can provide that, that raw data source that your sales team, your marketing team really, really wants and really needs in order to get their job done.
Great.
I know I've left some companies out. I'm going to have to apologize to those companies. I didn't mean to snub them, but I was just going off the top of my head there. I have the number 12 typically that I usually say to people. There's 12 companies you can trust out there. Just because it's a good round number. Mostly, I do have a list of competitors that I'll look at regularly. But I guess when you're talking about different things like maybe technology data, you have companies like Aberdeen Group, like HG Data out there, a couple other new ones that have come up recently. And so there's these offshoots of data, like you said, intent data, stuff like that. Then you get companies like Inside View and kind of these fringe companies. There's a lot of companies out there now that have LinkedIn connectors where when you're on